Hello, Thomas Malchow here. In this video, we're discussing the hamstring conundrum. That is why, although your hamstrings might feel tight, you should probably not be stretching them. And this is a confusing topic for a lot of people, including many healthcare professionals. And so to truly understand it, we're going to have to do a deep dive into the functional anatomy of the hamstring complex. Now, you have more than one hamstring. There's actually 3 muscles that comprise the hamstring complex, and we can split them up into medial and lateral, okay? Now, the medial hamstrings consist of semitendinosus and semimembranosus, whereas the lateral hamstring is one muscle, biceps femoris, but biceps femoris has 2 heads, a short head and a long head. Now, the long head of biceps femoris and the 2 semis all originate from the same spot on your pelvis called your ischial tuberosity, okay? So they all cross the back of your hip and are then involved in hip extension. The short head of biceps femoris originates from midway down your femur, and then all the hamstrings cross the back of your knee, which means they're all involved in knee flexion, right? But why did I separate them into medial and lateral? They all attach to the tibia. The 2 semis to the medial side, though, and biceps femoris to the lateral side. So that means the 2 semis are involved in tibial internal rotation, whereas biceps femoris is involved with tibial external rotation. And if we follow the line of pull across the hip, we can see that the 2 semis contribute to hip internal rotation, whereas biceps femoris, hip external rotation. And understanding this is really important, and we're going to come back to this in a minute, okay? But why do people stretch their hamstrings? Generally because it feels good, because their hamstrings feel tight, right? But what is one of the most common dysfunctions outlined in the scientific literature? We talked about this last time, lower cross syndrome, right? And somebody who has lower cross syndrome is going to have an anterior pelvic tilt, which means their ischial tuberosity, where their hamstrings originate from, is going to move up, which means their hamstrings will be pulled tight, right? And so having tight hamstrings is usually a symptom of lumbo-pelvic-hip complex dysfunction, not a cause of dysfunction, right? If you have an anterior pelvic tilt, your hamstrings will be put on stretch, which means the tightness you're feeling is not mechanical, it's neural. Your hamstrings are not short. If your hamstrings are short, you would have a posterior pelvic tilt, and that's really uncommon. Now, things do get more complex when we consider hip rotation and lower leg mechanics, but generally speaking, an anterior pelvic tilt equals long hamstrings. An anterior pelvic tilt also means your gluteus maximus has become long and underactive. And when that happens, your nervous system recruits the synergists to step up. One of those synergists is your hamstring complex. And so here we now have a unique situation where your hamstrings have been pulled long, but are now overactive due to synergistic dominance, right? And if you remember from the previous video, the 2 categories of muscles we come up with when it comes to muscle imbalances, we have short and overactive, long and underactive, and then this unique category of a few muscles that become long and overactive. This is how it happens. For every major postural dysfunction, there's at least one muscle that becomes long and overactive. Now, what do we do with a muscle that becomes long and overactive? What do we do with our hamstrings? We don't want to stretch them. If we stretch them or just make them longer, it's going to increase our anterior pelvic tilt more and reinforce dysfunction. Right? And this brings up an interesting topic about why do we even stretch muscles? What's the purpose of stretching? When it comes to performance, it's not because it feels good, right? When it comes to athletics, the reason we stretch is to return a short muscle to optimal length. If a muscle is not at optimal length, we're not going to have optimal cross bridging between actin and myosin, and we're not going to have optimal force production, right? So we stretch muscles to return them to optimal length tension relationships. Right? If we have optimal length tension relationships, we'll have optimal reciprocal inhibition, optimal range of motion, optimal force production, speed, and that's how we optimize our performance. If we stretch a muscle and make it too long, we're going to have less than optimal cross bridging, we have faulty recruitment patterns, altered reciprocal inhibition, instability, and all that's going to hurt our performance, right? And so when it comes to making us better at golf, it should be quite apparent that we don't want to stretch our hamstrings, right? We want to address our lumbo-pelvic-hip complex dysfunction, and part of that might involve a direct intervention on the hamstrings, but that intervention would not include static stretching and probably it wouldn't be applied to all three hamstrings. And the reason for that has to do with postural dysfunctions in general. So there's three main postural dysfunctions. Lower cross syndrome is one. Another one is pronation distortion syndrome. Somebody who has pronation distortion syndrome will have their feet slightly turn out, right? Feet turn out is tibial external rotation. That's biceps femoris, right? And so any intervention that we apply to our hamstrings is going to be applied to biceps femoris. Now I'm going to show you here what I do with my athletes when it comes to fixing their hamstrings. Again, the primary thing you want to focus on is addressing the lumbo-pelvic-hip complex dysfunction. I'm not going to show you anything here involving that. This is purely what I do with the hamstrings, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to address the tonicity of the biceps femoris. Now the biceps femoris is running along here. Now we can use a foam roller or a softball or myofascial release ball. Put it on the ground, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the ball so that it's just on the outside. You can see this tendon here. So I'm just looking in this area here. I'm going to survey the entire area looking for the most tender spot. I'm just sort of on an angle here. I could even cross my other leg over, and there I find it immediately. So I'm surveying, looking for the most tender spot, and that spot is the spot with the most adhesions. Again, this is biceps femoris, and the pressure applied by the foam roller or by the ball is going to initiate the autogenic reflex inside the muscle, encouraging that muscle to relax, reducing the tonicity. Okay, so I would hold this for 30 seconds to 2 minutes on each side. Now, after doing this, we don't want to do any static stretching because, again, the muscles, they're too long, right? However, we do want to use active stretching to reinforce optimal reciprocal inhibition. So active stretching is we use the antagonist to pull the biceps femoris through its full range of motion, okay? And how we do that is we're going to lay on our back. So do the right leg here. I'm going to cross my knee across the midline of my body. I'll show you here from this side. So here, I'm just coming across the midline of my body, and I'm just going to straighten my leg out. So I'm contracting my quadriceps, which is the antagonist to my biceps femoris, which is pulling my biceps femoris through its full range of motion, reinforcing optimal reciprocal inhibition and strengthening the muscle at its end range. So with active stretching, I would hold it at the end range for 1 or 2 seconds, return, and then back up 1 to 2 seconds, and I would perform 12 to 15 reps of this. Okay, now after doing 12 to 15 reps on both sides, I would stand up, and now I actually want to activate my hamstrings to shorten them a little bit. I want to optimize the cross bridging between the actin and the myosin. I would use a single leg touchdown to do that. So I'm standing on my one leg, hand on my hip. Now my foot, I don't want to have my foot travel in front of my body or behind. I'm just holding it about 1 inch off the ground, and I'm slowly reaching down, bending my knee, touching my toe, and then up, okay? So I'd lower myself for 4 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold that for 2, and then up for 1, okay? 4, 3, 2, 1, up. And again, I would do 12 to 15 reps. So again, the intervention that I apply to my athletes is applied directly to the biceps femoris alone. I inhibit it using a foam roller or a myofascial release ball, then use active stretching to optimize reciprocal inhibition. And then I use a single leg touchdown to shorten the muscle to optimize the cross bridging between actin and myosin. And again, this would be part of a larger intervention that would be organized around optimizing the alignment of the pelvis. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.